Today's video is brought to you by Darkflow Software, the creators of the epic World War II shooter Enlisted. Enlisted is an FPS game like no other, where PvP meets PvE in epic battles. You'll lead a squad of customizable AI soldiers and join massive battles with hundreds of players. And guess what? Enlisted offers multiple campaigns, each with unique weapons, vehicles, and gear, taking you from the outskirts of Moscow in 1941 to the heart of Berlin in 1945. Look, personally, I've enjoyed the campaigns. They each feel like individual games offering a completely new experience. Plus, you'll find over 100 weapons, tanks, and aircraft to unlock, from classics like the M4 Sherman to obscure gems like the BG2. And speaking of customization, Enlisted lets you tailor your soldiers with unique skills and gear, creating your dream squad. And there's even more. The graphics and attention to detail are incredible, even running well on low-end machines. What's the best part? Enlisted is approachable for all players thanks to its realistic movement and target-rich environment. And yet, it gets hardcore when it counts, with intense battles and realistic damage models. So here's the deal. You can play Enlisted for free right now on PC, PlayStation, or Xbox. Just head to playen.link/TIFO 2023, or just click the link in the description below to get in on the action. And if you register using my link, you'll score a free bonus pack loaded with multiple weapons, soldiers, and a premium account. So don't miss out. Play it today. And now today's video. When the sun scorches the earth, when incandescent air burns your lungs, and especially when that glucose curve dips at 10, 2, and 4 in the afternoon, well, there is nothing better than grabbing an ice-cold bottle of a very special soft drink. It's purplish label covered in beads of cooling moisture. We are, of course, talking about the first major soft drink to be invented in America, Dr. Pepper, beating Coca-Cola by 1 year and Pepsi by 8, all the way back in 1885. Non-Americans may have only a very vague idea of what Dr. Pepper is, considering that it is not as ubiquitous as Coke or Pepsi. But our viewers in the US are surely very familiar with its distinctive packaging and taste. Our friends in Texas, in particular, share a special bond with Dr. Pepper, as they can revel in pride knowing that the drink was invented in their very own Waco. Or can they? The fact is that the origin story of Dr. Pepper is steeped in lore and legends, marked by contradicting versions and no conclusively confirmed facts, and may not have been invented in Texas at all. What follows is going to be our attempt at sorting out that mess, while also in the process, for reasons that will soon make sense, diving into the fascinating reason why 18 is considered the age that we become adults, whether two people really are the only individuals who know the full recipe for Coca-Cola, and much, much more. So let's dive in, shall we? We've got plenty to get to. The most widely accepted origin story for Dr. Pepper takes us back to Waco, Texas in 1885, and more precisely to the old corner drugstore owned by pharmacist Wade Morrison, originally from Christiansburg, Virginia. That very year, a young pharmacist called Charles Alderton moved into town with his wife, Lily Walker. Alderton originally hailed from Brooklyn, but had conducted his medicinal studies in England and Texas. Charles and Lily married in October of 1884 in Galveston, Texas, where he ran a small flavor extracts business called Alderton & Co. In early 1885, a fire destroyed the business premises, which may have led to the Aldertons' decision to move to Waco. Charles soon found employment under Wade Morrison, and perhaps due to his experience with flavor extracts, he found a keen interest in the shop's soda fountain. On this, like many drugstores of the era, Morrison's establishment had a soda fountain, very popular with his clientele. For the non-initiated, this was essentially a bar where patrons could mix carbonated water with various, often fruity syrups of their choice, with generally, it's alleged that the concoctions had health benefits because, well, sure, why not? The story goes that Charles Alderton was enamored by the smell of different syrups, how they mixed in with the air and then wafted through the store. Eventually, he decided to recreate that unique scent and convert it into a new flavored fizzy drink. Alderton experimented with several different combinations of syrups, juices, herbs, and other ingredients, keeping meticulous notes in his journal. He finally hit upon the right mix, the very essence of that captivating soda fountain smell, and then concentrated it into carbonated pop. The young pharmacist offered the new drink to his boss, Wade Morrison. Apparently, he liked it so much that he asked Alderton if he could serve it to their customers. According to the US Patent Office, the drink, later known as Dr. Pepper, was first served on December 1st, 1885. Patrons were delighted with the new concoction, queuing up at the soda fountain and asking Alderton to shoot them a Waco, which was the original name of the drink. It clearly needed a new, more appealing brand, and ultimately Dr. Pepper was settled upon, which was initially stylized with a period, but that was dropped in the 1950s. And here lies the first mystery. How did Wade Morrison come up with this name? Not even the curators at the Dr. Pepper Museum in Waco know for sure, admitting that they have collected over a dozen different stories on how the drink came to be known as Dr. Pepper. If we want to stick to the most widely circulated hypothesis, the name Dr. Pepper, the drink, was inspired by an actual Dr. Pepper, Dr. Charles T. Pepper to be precise. Charles became Dr. Charles after earning a medical degree from the University of Virginia in 1855. When the Civil War broke out, he served as an army surgeon with the Confederacy. After the war, the doctor settled in the town of Rural Retreat, Virginia, where he opened a drugstore. Exactly how his name was transferred to the soda, however, is disputed and adds a further layer to the general, this is probably made up after the fact sense of things. According to one version, Charles Pepper had once employed Charles Alderton. Years later, the young pharmacist had honored his early benefactor by naming the new drink after him. A more widespread account places Wade Morrison instead in Rural Retreat working for Pepper. In 1885, it was him who wanted to acknowledge his old alleged employer as a way of thanking him. But there are yet more variants of the Morrison-Pepper hypothesis. A fan-favorite version claims that Wade Morrison had fallen in love with Dr. Pepper's daughter. The pharmacist had asked his employer for permission to marry her, but the doctor had refused. An embittered Morrison had then upped sticks and moved to Waco, where he had started his own drugstore. When the occasion came, he decided to call the drink Dr. Pepper in the hopes of winning the approval of his potential father-in-law. Actually, scratch that. Yet another version claims that Morrison had no intention to regain favor with his old employer. In fact, he had named his horse Pepper in jest, and the drink may have been named after the horse rather than the man. Or maybe forget about the horse. The name may have been picked by Alderton after all. After hearing Morrison recount his misadventures with Charles Pepper back in Virginia, the pharmacist chose the brand Dr. Pepper as a joke to tease his employer. There is also an entirely separate subset of theories which completely ignore the good Dr. Charles Pepper. The brand name may have been created from scratch by Morrison following some sound brand naming principles. He may have chosen the word pepper for several reasons. First of all, pepper is allegedly one of the ingredients of the drink, although this has never been officially confirmed by parent company Dr. Pepper Snapple Group. Probably the most plausible was that at the time these soda fountain drinks were often thought to be good for your health, and the name evoked peppiness or liveliness, a fitting concept considering that it was common for sodas in the late 19th century to be marketed as energizing tonics as well. Or the name may have been chosen also due to the syllable pep, a nod to the digestive enzyme pepsin a la Pepsi. Another feature commonly attributed to sodas was that they help digestion. Finally, the insertion of the title Doctor was a common practice that brands did in the era, as it was intended to reassure customers as to their medicinal properties. Now, all the accounts related so far are based on the solid foundation that the Dr. Pepper drink was invented by a Brooklyn-born pharmacist in Waco. Dr. Charles T. Pepper may have only played a tangential role as far as the name was concerned. You may find, however, that the inhabitants of Rural Retreat, Virginia, strongly contest this version. According to them, it was the OG Dr. Pepper who invented Dr. Pepper. Based on these claims, the Virginian doctor had developed a fizzy beverage of his own, made of mountain herbs and medicinal roots. When his former employer Morrison moved out of Rural Retreat and into Waco, he brought along the recipe and initiated mass production of the popular soda from 1885 onwards. From this version of events, it's not clear if Morrison had the doctor's blessing or simply stole the formula. Perhaps Morrison wanted to get back at Pepper for not allowing his daughter to marry him. But let me throw a plot twist into the story right now. What if I told you that Wade Morrison never courted Pepper's daughter? Back in 1992, Associated Press debunked the myth of Morrison pining for Miss Pepper, yet this strangely still survives, mainly thanks to corporate communications from Dr. Pepper Snapple Group. Associated Press reported that according to a census carried out in 1880, Dr. Pepper's daughter was born in 1874. Therefore, by the time Morrison and Alderton were experimenting with sodas in Waco, she would have been only 11 years old. Unless you're currently about to comment, well, different times, where an 11-year-old could be courted by an adult, or even older teen male in a socially acceptable way, we're going to go ahead and thoroughly debunk that in the bonus facts later in the video, so stay tuned. For those who don't care to watch that far, well, we'll just say for now that it has never in recorded history been terribly socially acceptable for an adult male to court a young teen girl, nor has it ever been common for a young teen girl, or even to an extent an older teen girl, to get married. And it was actually the baby boomer generation who saw one of the lowest marriage age averages in recorded history, oddly enough. And if you don't believe us, just watch to the end, and we're definitely not doing that for YouTube algorithmic reasons. But for now, either Charles Pepper had some extremely good reasons to tell Morrison to get the hell out of his store, town, and state, trying to court his 11-year-old daughter, or, more realistically, the entire story is just a wagon load of bovine gastrointestinal waste. In fact, there is evidence that Morrison may have never even met the Peppers. Millie Walker, curator at the Dublin, Texas Dr. Pepper Bottling Co. Museum, has pored over US Census records and found that before moving to Waco, Wade Morrison lived in Christiansburg, Virginia, 40 miles from Rural Retreat. Walker stated that there is not one piece of evidence that Morrison ever worked for Charles T. Pepper in Rural Retreat. Shocking, we know. In fact, probably shouldn't be if you've ever read some of these origin tales surrounding Dr. Pepper, which just scream once again, made up after the fact and nobody seemingly able to point to any real hard evidence to support much of it. On this note, the whole narrative behind the genesis of Dr. Pepper was hit by another curveball in 2008, following a chance discovery at an antiques shop in Shamrock, Texas. Bill Waters, a manuscript collector from Oklahoma, bought a wooden crate once used to store medicine bottles. While rifling through its contents, Waters found an old sales ledger bearing the letterhead W.B. Morrison & Co. Old Corner Drugstore. Waters couldn't believe his eyes when inside the ledger he found a handwritten recipe for something called D. Pepper's Pepsin Bitter. Most of the recipe was illegible, but it appears that this concoction was based on large quantities of syrup and mandrake root. According to British newspaper The Independent, this Pepsin Bitter had probably been devised as a digestive to make stomach medicines easier to swallow. The presence of mandrake, in fact, leads towards the gastrointestinal interpretation. Medieval law attributed magical powers to mandrake, purporting it was sufficient to carry a root on your person to increase your fertility and or libido. Magic aside, the herb does have medicinal properties. When used in very small doses, it can be used as a mild painkiller or to treat ailments such as stomach ulcers, colic, and constipation. But in large quantities, it can trigger vomiting, induce sedation, or a rather annoying side effect known as death. So yes, steer clear of mandrake and leave it to a certified pharmacist like the good folks working at the Morrison & Co. Old Corner Drugstore. Speaking of which, so far I mentioned only the top man and Charles Alderton, but the shop was, at one time, co-run by Morrison and another chemist, John Castles. The cover of the ledger found by Waters, the collector, was in fact inscribed with the phrase Castles Formulas. Could this be considered evidence that the first incarnation of Dr. Pepper was conceived as a medicine by the now forgotten John Castles? The heading for the recipe D. Pepper's Pepsin Bitter also potentially lends credence to the hypothesis that the drink was not based on a person, but was rather a reference to the root pep associated with digestive enzyme pepsin and digestion in general. Back in May 2009, Mr. Waters put up the ledger and recipe for auction, attracting the attention of the Dr. Pepper Snapple Group. A spokesman for the firm did not challenge the authenticity of the documents, but claimed that the ingredients listed in the ledger had little resemblance to the real Dr. Pepper recipe. Of course, we're guessing even those in charge of the actual Dr. Pepper formula these days probably aren't familiar with what the original was, let alone that a random spokesman is privy to such information on the modern formula. On this note, folks who have never had a sip of this soda may be wondering what's so special about it and its recipe. Just like for Coke, the formula for Dr. Pepper is a well-guarded secret locked in a vault inside the Dr. Pepper Snapple Group headquarters in Plano, Texas. Or it is allegedly. Again, as we've covered before in great detail, the whole idea of locking the formula in a vault with Coca-Cola has always been more of a marketing stunt than anything else, similar to the idea that only two people know the recipe for Coca-Cola and they're never allowed to be on a plane together, which, by the way, is a notion literally started by Coca-Cola in an advertisement. And we're just gonna guess Dr. Pepper is doing the exact same thing here. In truth, the exact number of people privy to the knowledge of how to make Coca-Cola isn't public knowledge. However, it's definitely more than two, as the sheer volume of the syrup being produced every day with slightly differing ingredients in different parts of the world necessitates that quite a few people need to know, and the least large portions of the ingredients and appropriate proportions of each in order to keep supplies flowing. This sort of volume just wouldn't scale well to only two people knowing how to make the product, especially if the extension of this myth were true, that each person only knows one half of the ingredients. Besides not scaling well, this would also be a recipe for disaster if anything happened to one of them and it wasn't written down anywhere else. This is partially why in one ad campaign, Coca-Cola claimed the two executives are not allowed to fly on a plane together. At the least, it's probable the exact ingredients, though perhaps not the exact proportions, are known by numerous people working at Coca-Cola. For instance, certain of the company's accountants, particularly the higher-ups, are probably well aware of what goes into the company's staple product. Invoices would create a very detailed paper trail with which it would be very easy to get the exact list of ingredients, even if the company had different factories making different parts of the syrup. It would also only be slightly harder to figure out the exact proportions given the relative volume of each of the ingredients being ordered going into the factories and the exact output of syrup coming out. Going back to the vault, while Coca-Cola does have a cartoonishly large vault in Atlanta, Georgia that allegedly holds their recipe, it strains credibility to think that this is the only place the recipe can be found in written form. And it wouldn't be surprising at all if it isn't even in there. You see, the latest vault was also all part of a publicity stunt for Coca-Cola's 125th anniversary in 2011. The fact that this custom vault is part of the world of Coca-Cola and they turned it into an interactive exhibit for the public would once again suggest that they, like most likely also with the case of Dr. Pepper, are more concerned with the publicity and enigma surrounding the formula than the actual information it contains. But going back to Dr. Pepper, all we know for sure is that the recipe, or at least the original version of it, with the modern formula very likely being quite different than its ancestor, is or was a combination of 23 different ingredients allegedly known only by 3 senior company executives at any one time. Which, once again, if your bullshit-o-meter is going crazy, we're not going to judge you on that one. On this formula, fans of the drink have tried to retro-engineer the recipe, and the most detailed attempt so far includes the following 23 flavors: amaretto, almond, blackberry, black licorice, caramel, carrot, clove, cherry, cola, ginger, juniper, lemon, molasses, nutmeg, orange, prune, plum, pepper, root beer, rum, raspberry, tomato, and vanilla deep breath. Is this an accurate listing though? Surely our taste buds are not refined enough to suggest an alternative formula, but we're going to challenge the presence of prune there. In its initial years of business, the Dr. Pepper company went to great lengths to dispel the rumor that their juice contained prune juice. Allegedly, this rumor was circulated by rival soda companies to insinuate that Dr. Pepper had laxative properties, but that's in itself a rumor which can be added to the pile of unsubstantiated lore which surrounds the drink. If we were to summarize what we know, the only certain conclusions we can draw about these matters are: we will never be entirely certain of who first came up with the recipe for Dr. Pepper, although Alderton, with initial inspiration from Castle, seems plausible enough based on evidence at hand. We will never know for sure who or how they came up with the name, though the Pepsin, Peppy line of reasoning does seem pretty reasonable, as does noting how common it was to include Doctor to the name of such supposed health tonics. And we'll never find out what is the original recipe. And indeed, even if Dr. Pepper announced the current recipe, it likely only bears resemblance from the OG. So, now at this point, you might be wondering how Dr. Pepper grew from that little shop in Waco to be beloved by nerds the world over today. On this, we can be a lot more definitive. After its invention in 1885, the citizens of Waco went crazy for the stuff, so much so that Morrison and Alderton sensed a business opportunity and started selling their flavored mixture to other soda fountain operators in town. But demand kept growing, dwarfing supply. Morrison realized he needed a business partner to scale up production. He found one in Robert S. Lazenby, a young beverage chemist and owner of the Circle A Ginger Ale Company in Waco. Lazenby loved Dr. Pepper and was happy to give it a shot. Charles Alderton, on the other hand, had lost interest in the sector of fizzy drinks and was happy to sell the rights to use his recipe to his business associates. Alderton lived in Waco most of his life, focusing on pharmaceutical work and his commitments with the local Masonic Lodge, of which he later became master in June of 1911. After remarrying in 1919, Alderton joined the Waco Drug Company, overseeing the company's research lab. He would later be recognized as one of the leading chemists in the south of the US. But let's return to Morrison and Lazenby. The two co-founded the Artisan Manufacturing and Bottling Company in 1891, with the intention of scaling up the production of the successful drink. In September 1898, the Southwestern Soda Fountain Company, based in Dallas, bought the rights to manufacture and sell Dr. Pepper syrups. In other words, the folks at Southwestern would own the production of the concentrated syrup, while Morrison and Lazenby's Artisan would take care of mixing the syrup with carbonated water, bottling the end product and distributing it. In September 1902, the Southwestern changed its name to Dr. Pepper Company. A logical move, but the Artisan Bottling Company still called the shots when it came to distribution. It was Lazenby's idea, in fact, to introduce Dr. Pepper to its largest audience yet. This happened at the Louisiana Purchase Exposition, also known as the St. Louis World Fair, from April to December 1904. At the exposition, ecstatic crowds are apparently first exposed en masse to hamburger buns, hot dogs, and ice cream cones, although as we've covered before, there is much more to those stories than the popular narrative today claims. But those are stories for another day. But for this one, the audiences did enjoy Dr. Pepper there, and it was an instant hit. In 1920, the Artisan Manufacturing and Bottling Works was absorbed into the Circle A, Lazenby's original corporation. The new entity became the only authorized bottler of Dr. Pepper concentrate, but they had little cause to celebrate. Rises in prices of commodities and in bottling taxes caused the company to file for bankruptcy in June of 1923. 1 month later, what remained of Circle A was incorporated into the Dr. Pepper Company, finally placing production of concentrate and bottling under one roof. Under the guidance of Lazenby's son-in-law, John O'Hara, Dr. Pepper continued to grow in popularity thanks to well-conceived marketing strategies. O'Hara's company employed the Tracy Lock Dawson Advertising Agency, or TLD. In 1926, TLD execs learned about an interesting study published by Dr. Walter H. Eddy at Columbia University. The study found that the blood sugar levels of the average individual were at their lowest around 10:30 a.m., 2:30 p.m., and around 4:30 p.m. Copywriter Earl Racy came up with a slogan, "Drink a bite to eat at 10, 2, and 4. This was an incredibly successful strapline, which earned Earl Racy a $25 bonus. That's $432 adjusted for inflation, which is kind of a stingy reward if you ask me, as the 10-2-4 concept was also incorporated into the logo and remained in use until the 1970s. Moreover, it laid the foundation of Dr. Pepper's image as a liquid pick-me-up for busy people conducting useful work. This became very useful during World War II, when the US rationed sugar, a much-needed ingredient for the explosive industry. The Dr. Pepper Company responded by issuing a booklet called The Liquid Bite, explaining how their soda could act as an energy booster for soldiers and workers. Although, while sugar can indeed provide energy for physical activity similar to any other carb, we would just like to point out here that it is a myth that sugar makes anyone, including kids, hyper or anything of the sort. That is absolutely not a thing. In any event, in the post-war era, the drink maintained its identity as an energizing tonic and was advertised with the slogan, "The Friendly Pepper-Upper." In the 1960s and 1970s, it became clear to the Dr. Pepper Company, later Dr. Pepper Snapple Group, that they could not compete against the giants of the soft drink business, such as Coca-Cola and Pepsi. In another stroke of advertising savviness, the new brand identity switched from sugary energy to originality and uniqueness. First, Dr. Pepper embraced the slogan, "The most misunderstood soft drink," followed by "The most original soft drink even in the whole wide world." And finally, be a pepper, be you. We could not agree more. Even if you've never tried Dr. Pepper, or even if you find that its combination of allegedly 23 ingredients is not to your taste, it is undeniable that this drink stands aside from others in the market. Just don't try and drink it when it's gone flat and warm. Goes from the nectar of the gods to chemical pig swill. Only the Friendly Pepper-Upper can boast such a complex, fascinating, and contradictory foundational myth, in itself a clear sign of the special place that this sort of drink holds in the hearts of American pop culture and nerds the world over. Paired with pizza or Caesar salad, really not sure it gets much better than that. Bonus fact. Going back to the whole teen girl marriage thing as alluded to previously, this has never, in recorded history, been the norm outside of with the royals occasionally, which is likely where this myth comes from. As for the rest of the human populace, while certainly there was a little more wriggle room than in modern times, in many places, setting the line at 18 plus, as in very modern times, was more or less the norm. For example, a study performed by the National Bureau of Economic Research, NBER, on marriage in North America and Western Europe found that young women from the 17th through 19th centuries were not all that young when they got married. Case in point, in Massachusetts, records dating from 1652 to 1800 demonstrate that the mean age of first marriage for ladies was between 19.5 and 22.5 years, and records for other colonies reflect similar ages. In fact, the average age of first marriage for all of the colonies studied was 19.8 before 1700, 21.2 during the 18th century, and a whopping 22.7 during the late 18th century. This is consistent with data gathered in England, France, and Germany that puts the average mean age of first marriage for women at 25.1 from 1750 to 1799 and 25.7 from 1800 to 1849. Maintaining the trend, by the end of the 19th century, the median age when women were first getting married was between 22 and 24 years old, and this tendency continued into the 1940s. In fact, the lowest median age of first marriage since the 1700s was had by the baby boomer generation, where the age dropped to 20.5 years in 1950. Unsurprisingly, perhaps this generation also saw the highest divorce rates in recorded history, with that number, contrary to popular belief, declining rapidly in recent years as the age of marriage has been increasing. Finally, if you're now wondering how society came to the age of 18 for adulthood, well, pretty arbitrarily, and in part just because of war. On this, in modern times, we've collectively decided, in the ballpark of 18, depending on nation, is when people are old enough to make good choices, including when it comes to reproductive and marital activities. But of course, for most of history, nobody thought like this. For example, at just 16 years old, Alexander the Great was busy conquering Mede when they dared to revolt against Macedonia. Also at 16, a peasant girl by the name of Joan of Arc was taking her first first steps into historical prominence by having the gall to approach a garrison commander to tell him how to do his job. At 15, when Charles Algernon Parsons was busy inventing the precursor to the modern automobile, at 16, Julius Caesar was heading his family after his father's death. History is littered with individuals accomplishing remarkably adult things long before the age that most countries today would say that they're sufficiently mature enough to be considered an adult. Which, well, actually, a lot of bizarre history starts to make a lot more sense when you consider how many teenage boys were running things, even in more relatively modern times in British Parliament, where that totally was a thing sometimes. But in any event, unsurprisingly for parts of history, the issue of when someone was ready to take over various adult activities largely fell to their family, not the government to decide. And this too included marriages, accounting for some of the wiggle room that we previously discussed. Nevertheless, while maturity levels vary greatly from person to person, and the people who know the individual best may be able to determine things for everyday activities, a number that generally fits everyone is often needed to set certain communal laws. Thus, the age when a person is considered sufficiently able to manage these adult activities and answer for others is typically set by civil policy makers within a nation, and in certain cases, sometimes by each individual state within a country. For example, in California, the age of consent is set at 18, a number largely proliferated by Hollywood and thus often considered the set age of consent in the US. However, most states actually set it lower, sometimes significantly so, and in many cases without restriction on age gap between the individuals after that cutoff. The important thing is simply consent. Going back to why specifically 18, at least in the United States, it used to be 21, but seemingly was at least partially reduced because that's the age when most people graduated high school, and the majority of people in the United States attended such a public institution when the switch was made. As for why the age was changed at all, the reasons behind this include massive improvements in public education since the 21 number was originally set, recognition that 18-year-olds were able to enter into legally binding contracts, get married, have children, and could even be forcibly drafted. This latter point was critical to the change, as 18-year-old males at the time of the switch could be forced to fight in a war but had no voting say in whether their country went to war in the first place. This was a particularly hot topic in the Vietnam War era, when many youth strongly opposed the war, and those politicians who felt likewise were keen on getting those young people the ability to vote. Of course, today we know that the human brain doesn't fully finish developing until closer to one's mid-20s and even potentially into the 30s. Similar to the early onset of puberty, the female brain typically finishes its development about 2 years before the male. In fact, the frontal lobe, which is extremely important in our decision-making, among other things, including being crucial for appreciating future consequences to current actions and inhibiting impulses, isn't finished developing until many years after pretty much every culture in the world considers you an adult. Nevertheless, for incredibly arbitrary reasons, most societies consider people adults around 18, and because of that, the age of consent, and when it's acceptable to get frisky with other adults, is usually set around the ballpark of 10. Although, if getting it on with someone of your own age as a teen, most nations, in order to avoid locking up their teenagers, have exemptions in the laws if the age gap isn't too big. Don't click away just yet. Just a quick reminder that if you go to playen.link/TIFO2023 or click the link in the description below, you can start playing Enlisted today. You'll also snag that fantastic free bonus pack. So dive in to the action with Enlisted today, link below, and thanks for watching.